If you use password managers like 1Password or KeePassX, we'll show you a way on macOS to dump the credentials to a remote computer on this episode of Cyber Weapons Lab. It is almost always a good idea to use a password manager because it prevents you from using passwords that are too simple or from reusing the same password across multiple accounts. Now, there are exceptions, and this comes from not using all the security features that are allowed by companies like 1Password or KeePassX. An example of this is using browser extensions that autofill your credentials. Now, why use these? Well, if you copy and paste your credentials, it makes them extremely vulnerable, if only for a moment. And today, we're going into an attack written by Tokyoneon that actually takes advantage of this using built-in macOS tools. Now, to do this, we'll need a macOS computer and then a second computer using Kali or Debian on the same network. What we're going to do is start a PHP server on our attacker computer, and then on the victim computer, we're going to be setting a cron tab, which is basically a job that runs over and over, which checks for the contents of the clipboard, and then once it has something interesting, sends it back over to the PHP server, allowing us to intercept credentials which were copied and pasted. Now, this is a super interesting attack because it also evades certain tools like Rekey, which is a tool that basically scans for keyloggers and attempts to look for attacks like this. So the fact that it is evasive to those sorts of detection tools is really interesting and cool. Now, if you get confused, you can also check out the Null Byte article linked in the description, which was written by Tokyoneon, and I also encourage you to follow his Twitter at Tokyoneon_ because he comes with a lot of these great attacks and writes up on Null Byte, but you might find out more on Twitter as well. Once you have an Ubuntu computer set up and ready to go, and a macOS victim computer ready to play with, then we can begin. Now, it's important for me to preface this by saying that if you're using these properly, this attack probably won't work. The reason it does work is that people will often copy and paste their passwords from a password manager, and that's where we can get in there and actually use this to our advantage. Now, we're going to be doing something called living off the land, and this excellent guide by Tokyoneon, who you should all check out and follow on Twitter at Tokyoneon_, has created this way of living off the land and using a just existing tool. If we copy this string and then go into terminal, here this, I'm going to paste it, and then I'm going to get rid of everything except just pb paste, and we'll see what this actually does. Now, this is a built-in command in macOS that basically dumps the contents of the clipboard. So if I were to copy some text from the article, go back, and then run it again, boom, you would see that. So this might not seem like a big deal, but because this is a built-in tool, I don't need to bring any tricky malware that's acting like a keylogger that could get flagged and get my intrusion into a target computer detected. So what we're going to be doing is basically building a payload and creating it so that if we manage to put this into someone's computer, we could capture sensitive things they were copying and pasting by intercepting that and sending it over a backdoor connection to a PGP server, which is basically sitting here, a PHP server, which is basically sitting here and downloading anything that we send to it and appending it to the end of a file. So, all right, this is what's going to happen. We're going to take first this payload, which is while true, do echo tac e, all the stuff. So it's basically the result of pb paste, putting it into something in the tmp folder that is just called clipboard.txt. And then we're going to wait 5 seconds, done. So this is a infinite loop. So it's going to go over and over and over. And this will be our primary payload for what we're building, which will be in effect an attempt to capture every single thing that this macOS user captures in their clipboard and then send it to a remote listener. So what we're going to do to read this is go into a netcat shell and then tail the clipboard contents in order to read this. But one thing that will be necessary is to make sure that we can receive this information, which we'll be doing via a remote server. And here I have 2 different windows logged into an Ubuntu computer, and I'm going to go ahead and use that computer to do the listening in this case. So just so you know, on the left side of my screen, macOS, on the right side of my screen, I have Ubuntu. and we're going to be attacking the macOS computer from the Ubuntu computer effectively. So keep that in mind while we're doing this guide. Now on the Ubuntu computer, we're going to need to install PHP. And the nice thing about this attack is it doesn't assume that we can install anything on the macOS computer. We're just, oops, got to sudo that. We're just, oh, I'm not gonna do an update because I just did that, but I am gonna do an install. And this is going to install PHP to make sure that we have the ability to do this attack. Now I'm gonna cd desktop, and then from here, I'm going to create a folder called PHP server. And excuse me from copying and pasting from the article, but it's a great way to avoid making mistakes. We'll cd into that folder, I'm not that lazy. And then from there, we're going to be making a file. And we can use Nano to do this. You can use V or whatever you want if you know how to get out of Vim. But we're gonna use Nano. And we're gonna call this index.php. All right, so we're gonna paste this in here. And this is just the PHP needed to append to the end of clipboard.txt. Okay, so then we're going to start the PHP server while we are inside this folder, and that's important. So from the same, you can't go ahead and do it here. We need to do it inside the PHP server folder. We're going to run this server on port 80. And sometimes if you're running Ubuntu, there will be something already there. Yay. So in my case, I'm gonna run it on 81. Oh, never mind. Let's do sudo. So this is Ubuntu, it demands permission. And then the other thing I said happened, so it's already in use. So we'll do 81. Okay, so now we're serving it on port 81. We'll need to modify our instructions a little bit, but let's go ahead and get started. So this is the payload that we're going to use, and you can see it's all kind of laid out and described here. This is the infinite loop. This is going to be the condition where we're checking to see if the item in the paste bin or in the temporary file equals the last item that we saw, basically checking to see if anything new has been added to the clipboard. Then we're going to go ahead and put that in a variable called p, encoded in base 64, and then we're going to go ahead and send it to the attacker. Now the attacker is going to be replaced with our IP address, and the rest of this just handles checking to see, putting that variable into the one that we check against. So basically updating our check variable and then going to sleep for 5 seconds. So when this is all in one line, you can see that it's right here, but we're going to need to modify this a little bit for it to work. So on my network, this computer is located at 192.168.0.16, I believe. So before, nope, that's not gonna work. So before this is gonna work, let's go over here. We're going to need to change this from attacker.com to 192.168.0.16. Port 81. Let's see if this works. All right, I'm gonna go back to the guide, and the next step is going to be to basically examine the exfiltrated data and see if we've actually got something. So within PHP server, I'm actually gonna use the fact that I have another window open. I'll do cd desktop, and here I can see cd PHP server ls, and we can see index.php. It looks like nothing has been sent yet. I'm gonna also go ahead and just double check. And I can see that the IP address on this computer is, 192.168.0.16. So let's go ahead and see if we can get this to work. Okay, so one thing I realized that I need to modify on the PHP server, which is why this originally didn't work, was the IP address. So here where it's 0000, go ahead and type in the IP address of your attacking computer. So that would be 192.168.0.16. Yes, 0.16. And when you run that, then there we go. We should be able to cancel this, rerun it, and let's see if we can get a successful connection. There we go. All right, so another thing is you have to copy and paste something in order for it to work. So let's go ahead and randomly copy and paste some stuff. In this case, we can go to Keychain access, and let's choose a stupid password. Oops. No, not Keynote at all. So if I really wanted to copy this account, and that's something I'm interested in, and I paste it somewhere. Okay, let's now see if our exfiltration server has worked successfully. So we'll go ahead and cancel this. We'll go ahead and cancel this. And then in here, we can type ls and see that we've created clipboard.txt. Now, if we cat clipboard.txt, it's going to be a bunch of junk. However, we'll need to decode the base 64 that we encoded it into in order for us to send it and make it a little bit more easy to obscure what's going on here. So let's go ahead and paste this. And what that's going to do is take the output of that and basically pass it through base 64 to decode it. And there we go. We can see the part of the article that we copied. We can see another part that we copied, and then something that we copied from a password manager, perhaps for the convenience of dropping it into, I don't know, a login where you don't have a browser extension enabled. Now, if you're using incognito mode, this could be the only way for you to log in with a really highly secure password. So this can be really annoying if you're using a browser extension to manage your passwords and then it doesn't work. Maybe you're using a guest account or something like that. Either way, there's a lot of ways you could get caught by accidentally copying and pasting a password or some other credential you don't want to have being shared. Now, this process can run in the background, so if you're using something like LastPass, KeePassX, or 1Password, then you could definitely get caught up by not using the autofill function, which prevents attacks like this from succeeding. Interestingly, this also defeats some other ways of detecting keyloggers and things like that. There are some tools out there for monitoring for keyloggers, and this bypasses most of them because it's a built-in tool that isn't considered to be spyware. So attacks like this really put users' privacy at risk because they can live off the land and they work surprisingly effectively on a unpatched or a fully patched macOS system. Now, this is a perfect example of how bad security practices can poke a hole in even relatively secure applications like password managers. Most of these password managers actually do provide ways that would completely invalidate this attack if you use them properly, which is browser extensions which directly insert your password rather than needing to copy and paste them. In spite of nearly all of these password managers having that availability, most people do not use them, and that's a reason why this attack works. So the lesson from this is, if you're not using your security properly, it won't work. And in this case, that's exactly what makes people vulnerable if they're using a password manager and copying and pasting their credentials in plain text. That's all we have for this episode of Cyber Weapons Lab. I want to thank Tokyoneon for writing this awesome article, and you can check out his article linked in the description if you need any help. And if you have any ideas for future articles, send me a message on Twitter @CodyKinsey, because I'd love to hear from you. We'll see you next time.